in and of itself you are necessarily realistic. Just because you have money, it doesn't mean you are you spend a large amount of your time. What is this world has to offer? Even if you had all the gold and all the silver locked away in the case of these men here in Judah, materialism, the pursuit of having more, not being content with what God had provided to them, which, by the way, was already more than they deserved, had turned away from God. They were idol worshipers. They had placed the God of stuff higher than God himself. Their true philosophy of life, in so many words, was, again, I love the creation, not later. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount? And this was really, this sermon was so easy because there was so much low-hanging fruit here. In fact, you know that Jesus spoke more about money and possessions than about heaven. When in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6:24, Jesus says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So as we read the initial general indictment of the people in the first 7 verses of Isaiah 5, where God had richly provided every advantage, right? He says he had protected them. He had made the ground fertile for them. They had a very unique fellowship with God. He was present there with them. And so in oneness among them. I mean, you would think maybe, just maybe, the people would stop and think, gee, look at what God has done for us. God is so good to us. Let's be thankful and let's worship him alone. And by the way, let's pass on the blessings to our brothers and sisters. But instead, what did they produce? They produced wild grapes. They produced rancid grapes. They produced the fruit of mine. Give me, give me, give me. I don't care that you don't have a roof over your head as long as I have multiple houses that I can live in and that I own all the land for as far as you can see. My friends, if God is not enough for you, if you set your heart upon material things, if those things consume all of your time, your talent, your thoughts, then by default, what you have done is you have turned away from the living God. You are, in essence, saying, God, you are not enough. I need more. I reject him. I want more of what this world has to offer. Then God would look down from heaven and say to you, woe upon you. Because if you reject him, there only remains judgment. He will not bless. He will not bless idolatry. He will not bless the worship of things. He will withdraw his hedge of protection, which is what we studied before, right? He's going to break down the walls. He's going to remove the hedge of protection. He is going to remove his presence. And he will lay waste to all of those idols that you have worshiped. And if God's blessings and protections lead you to produce the greed, materialism, rather than the fruit of justice and righteousness, then be sure of this, that God's judgment will come. You cannot enrich yourself at the expense of others and expect God's blessings to remain upon you. If you do not love your brother, who you can see, How can you love a God that you cannot see? Isn't that what 1 John 4:20 tells us? If anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. You be the judge. You be the judge. Let's look at one example here in the New Testament. We sit there and imagine for 12:8, and I tell you, everyone who acknowledges me before men and will word against the Son of Man will be one who blasphemes against the Spirit will be forgiven. Bring you before rulers, not be anxious of you should hour what in this life do you eternal things like to ask in a crowd at all concerned about eternal things, not at all concerned about great get more clarity. How could I get more clarity that exactly how more about this sin forgiveness? Gee, are you listening? Said really that tone to us about things that have led a thing of come on, man. I want you then that Jesus goes right where this man's heart is. How does Jesus this man? Your covetousness, life does in the possession. He goes on into possession. Who gives away that which he this was not platted. No, he laid down not lose. Was he not a man of understanding? A man who was walking by faith rather than by sight. Neighbors, I don't even want to be able to see any neighbors. I want it all. C.S. Lewis, in which he describes hell, an enormous with mansions, and they all end up living a fire. But be careful. Be careful that you're not actually the selfishness of hell. Even Jeremiah Johnson got lonely up in the Rockies. Jeremiah Johnson, but God 10 acres of vineyard and a homer of seed. But whoever has the most toys wins, right? That big, beautiful home. It's been a whole month. I'm sorry. Back the road is true. You could tell she's left, right? All posted, right? Pretty all the way from her. She saw some boot print inquest, and you're not taking it with you. Is it such a big deal? I mean, somebody stepped on in your snow. Technically, they trespassed. But I think we lose sight of the big picture sometimes. All those nice fields in which you trust in and you value more than God, well, God's going to say, you know what? They're not even going to produce like they naturally should. That big vineyard that would normally produce tons of wine, it's only going to produce a bath, which was only about 6 gallons. And a homer, which would be 6 bushels of seed, which would normally produce many bushels of grain, is ironically only going to produce an ephah, which is only about a half of a bushel, which if you do the math, that's 1/12 the number of the seed that was sown. You see, God loves his people too much to allow you to prosper in your materialism, in your selfishness. All have they been since the fall. I don't think people who are selfish and simply out for themselves, I can't prove this by any, I mean, election. taps within us. More free stuff if you vote for me. If you vote for me, you'll get free healthcare, free tuition. You'll get your student loans canceled. One guy running in the last election, he wanted to give free money to everybody every month. Your taxes so you have more. Well, I want to give you $600. I'm going to give you $2,000. All right, I'll stop. I'll just say, it's not a, I'll just say, it's not a issue. It's generations, as long as we don't have to come down a level in our living standards, because we're not content with food and clothing. But we're willing to take from others. We're willing to take from future generations so that we can have more. It's greed and materialism. Standing here saying, Paul wrote these words to Timothy, and in 1 Timothy 6, Paul says, if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. Paul's saying, look, if you got a pair of Levi's and you got a hot dog from Sheetz, those who desire to be rich through a snare into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people in destruction from the faith and pierce themselves with many pangs. And it may be some of you, as for the man impoverish himself, asceticism that you have to enjoy, but don't set your hopes on it. Don't worship it. Don't love it. He says they are to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves, which is truly life. Here's the thing that we fail to consider, that no matter how much we have, we always want more, and we never stop and ask ourselves, why am I not content? Some men, by God's grace, have risen above the matrix of Vanity Fair. And they go, you know what? I thought if I had this or I had that, I'd be content. But you know what? Every time I get this or get that, I'm still not very content. I wonder why that is. Well, C.S. Lewis answers the question. C.S. Lewis says, if I find in myself a desire for which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. This world is not your home. That's why you're never satisfied. Let me just close with just a couple caveats here, just to emphasize the point. Having wealth or money does not automatically mean that you are materialistic. Does not condemn a man. Having nice things is not necessarily being materialistic. I mean, you've God, who was actually a very good choice. Or you can think about Job. Job was actually an extremely wealthy man who God said there is none like him on earth. A blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. But he had a lot of wealth. Having money and wealth is not always equal to having or some of the most generous people that I've known. In fact, let me go on to number 2 here. Those who are poor, you may think of yourself as poor, but you know that even though you might be poor, you can still face. So what poor, if you want to discover where your heart really